Johnny's memories within 2077 are lying, merging different events, replacing experiences, and creating new memories entirely. Alongside these altered memories, his real memories have been altered by Johnny's own perceptions of himself, making changes based on Johnny's own truth. So what do Johnny's warped memories and his interactions as an engram tell us about the real Johnny Silverhand? To get a better picture, we need to look at how Johnny's memories are altered, what his interactions with his past tell us, and what his journey with V teaches him. Here is the tragedy of Johnny Silverhand. In my last video, I went over his entire life, recounting his neglectful and abusive upbringing, how by the age of 4 he had already been abandoned, sold off for a pack of cigarettes by his father, then being exposed to a life of violence so young during his time with the Nomads. Already at a young age, he was at a disadvantage with building relationships and knowing how to love and be cared for. This set the tone for how Johnny would treat people. He didn't break the cycle of abuse, only continued it. He had a very rough start in life, joining a war at 15, and then losing his arm after being most likely experimented on, and then becoming a cyberpsycho from those experiments and his new implants. Johnny would lose some of his humanity at the age of 15. Not all of his humanity, but enough that people around him noticed his coldness. Johnny wasn't even an adult yet, and war completely changed him, to the point that he wanted that person to die and a new one to be born. Johnny Silverhand exists because of the suffering Robert John Linder went through. His refusal to address his past and instead run from it would make him leave destruction in his wake, ruining every relationship he had, and people had given up on him. When we see the engram version of Johnny, he knows this. Not at first, but revisiting the most important people in his life shows him this. They are better off without him. Kerry's career took off, Rogue made a name for herself, and Alt became something more. He was a burden on them. And when he returns as an engram, he is essentially repeating the same dynamic with V. He knows he's killing V, and he feels guilty about it. Though I'd argue this is representative of what Johnny's relationships with everyone are like in his life. He takes and takes and takes, which brings Johnny to his journey with V. Waking up in V's head is traumatic for Johnny. In his last moments, he was ripped in two by Adam Smasher, as she sacrificed his life for his friends and the woman that he failed. And in an instant, he is brought back, unsure of how. It's been 54 years since his death. Everything is different, and he's angry about it. His anger at his confusion is also joined by his anger at not being in control. Control is Johnny's way. He controlled his relationships, the band, and everything around him, leading the way and taking charge in every aspect. And when he is resurrected as an engram, this entire dynamic changes. In the beginning, he is set in his old ways. He's immediately hostile, threatens to kill V, and then asks for a smoke, wanting a vice. He's suspicious, condescending, and his first action is to hurt V to try and take control back. This is Johnny's nightmare. No vices, no control, and no say. But it doesn't take much for Johnny to realize how fucked he is, and he goes from trying to kill V to trying to use them and Rogue. He knows Rogue will do whatever he says, that Rogue will dance to whatever tune Johnny plays. He's still the same piece of shit who cheated on her all those years ago. This Johnny in the very beginning is the closest to the Johnny that lived in 2023. And that Johnny was a selfish asshole, but he thought he was at the top of the world. He says Johnny Silverhand died a fucking legend. And with this journey with V, he finds out the truth of what that really means, which isn't really much at all. Johnny admired Wendy O. Williams for her suicide because of how she lived her life, and I think he tried to follow in her footsteps. At least he thought he was. Johnny was very impacted by her death. And I think he thought his own would affect others the way that he was affected by hers, that it wouldn't be for nothing. And while people were affected by Johnny's death, ultimately his death doesn't really mean much in the end. And when Johnny comes back and sees this, I think this hits him the hardest out of everything he's reliving. That he lived and died and mostly faded into obscurity. His message didn't enact change or any type of revolution. It just faded away. Many would argue that Johnny loves himself, being a typical narcissistic and egotistical asshole. But I think deep down, Johnny actually hates himself, especially when he comes back as an engram. The thing he wanted to be remembered for, his life's mission was to take down Arasaka, to stop the corporations from amassing power and hurting more people. Yet, Arasaka still stands, more powerful than ever. So, what was it all for? Johnny, sober for the first time in probably years, has to watch as the world moved on without him, realizing that his life didn't make the impact that he thought it would, and that his friends would move on without him too. He doesn't have anything anymore. And unlike when he was alive, he can't hide from it this time by getting high or drunk or whatever vice helped him forget. He is filled with rage and resentment and shame. He usually suppresses his emotions and mind with drugs and escapism. When Johnny encounters someone from his old unit, he mentions that the things they saw and did were enough to make someone lose their mind. Johnny was no doubt dealing with those same demons, suppressing them with drugs and his chaotic impulsiveness. You can't think about the demons if you can't remember them. So this is probably the first time in a very long time that Johnny has to face the truth. Abandonment, neglect, and war took everything from him, including a part of his humanity. His destructive tendencies would affect everyone around him, and Johnny would hurt and kill many people. And now, alongside his lost cause, he is forced to see the pain he left in his wake, forced to relive trauma and his own death over and over. The Johnny we meet is a man full of regret for the Johnny that lived. And after replaying these events in his mind over and over, Johnny's own perceptions of his truth have altered his memories. We all see memories from our own perspective. We all have our own truth, and Johnny is no different. But we know the truth of some of these events, and by comparing them, we can understand a bit more about who Johnny Silverhand is and how he views himself. Several of these memories have reframed Johnny as being more important than he was, starting from the very first interaction. Johnny's memories show 4 people attacking him, but in truth, there were only 3 that jumped him. Maybe his ego added more to make himself feel better about losing. He also says that they were obviously after him, not Alt, that they only wanted her because she was fucking him, reducing Alt to just someone just connected to him. In his memory, he also already knows it was Arasaka before being told, but in reality, Thompson broke the news to Johnny. He didn't know, and he was much calmer when receiving the news. His memories have made him know more than he did. Johnny also claims that the op was his and not Blackhand's, but it really wasn't. His Malorian is also stronger in his version of the night of the tower bombing, painting him as more powerful than he was. All of these small changes make us see a man who thinks he knew more than he did, that he was more powerful than he was, and that he thought that there was no way that his girlfriend could be more wanted than him. Johnny's memories are also more violent than the true events may have been. Maybe having been affected by the hand, his cyberpsychosis after all these years. We can see him grab Alt and beat Thompson to near death. But we know Thompson's beating didn't happen. Did Alt's? Has his cyberpsychosis festered and changed the events this much? It's an option in his flashback, not a permanent fixture in his memory. So there's room for it to not be true. But is this Johnny realizing how badly he treated Alt? And maybe has somehow manifested it with physical abuse? Does he think he's capable of that? Or that he was truly horrible enough to have done it in the first place? Is this his guilt, or maybe he truly was that bad? His memories also show him ripping the connection directly out of Alt, killing her with his own hand. But that's not what actually happened. Johnny stormed the tower with the explosives going off, knocking the cord out of her when Toshiro fell on the ground on top of her deck. It wasn't Johnny, and yet he's maybe put the guilt of it on himself, realizing after all this time that he was the reason she was disconnected from her body, that he was the reason that she died. After, we also see his version showing him beating Thompson to near death. Directly after, no matter what option we choose, the hand has taken over. But this didn't happen. There's no emotions here, when in the original it just doesn't happen like this. Johnny's emotions have been brewing, altering these events, just like Alt said. There is so much anger here that his hand always takes over, beating the closest person near him. But it never fade away. His hand only takes over to shoot Toshiro, not to hit Thompson. Johnny also tells you while speaking in the net that he didn't work with Thompson again. But Thompson was in both assaults on Arasaka, the one from 2013 when Alt died, and the one from 2023. It's clear that him replaying these memories over and over has been building more and more anger. And maybe he wishes he did more or did things differently. Maybe he wishes he never worked with Thompson in the first place. Johnny's memories are also altered by how we view him. If we choose the harsher, meaner options, then his interactions will be meaner with Rogue, Kerry, or Alt. Johnny's memories are the perfect way to reflect what an unreliable narrator he truly is. Not only are his memories altered by his own biases and perceptions of himself, but they're also influenced by how we view him. Calling him an unreliable narrator is pretty generous. We are experiencing Johnny's memories through his damaged engram that has been being tampered with, and then influenced by his own personal biases, and then finally V's perspective. This is important because it explains why there are different versions of Johnny. He can be crueler, colder, and more violent, or he can be kinder and more caring. All of these versions of the real Johnny existed. Whether they happen within these specific moments is up for debate, but Johnny was all the things he thought he was, based on what Alt, Kerry, and Rogue tell us, and how they view him. Each version of Johnny does represent a feeling that he has. While he can be very apologetic towards Alt, he can also be resentful. He feels that he gave up everything for her, and even though she didn't ask him, he tries to leverage this as a way to get Alt to help him. He does the same thing with Rogue, telling her she owes him for whatever happened in Colorado. This is a common tactic with Johnny: manipulation, guilt trips, saying whatever he needs to get what he wants. But even still, I do think he had a genuine feeling of resentment towards the situation with Alt. He refuses to take accountability for it all being his decision, which is a common thing that Johnny does: blame others. We can really see this dynamic with Kerry and Johnny, and I think Kerry was someone Johnny really took advantage of. In the different versions of his flashbacks, there are moments where he is always an asshole to Kerry. We can see him being kind to Kerry if we choose it. There's several versions of Johnny that he remembers, and that the people in his life remembered. But the major question with these memories is, do they even matter to his engram? Does experiencing them and reliving them make this Johnny want to change? The answer is maybe. It depends. If we choose the more violent asshole choices in his memories, then the engram is influenced by that. That is the version that exists, and that version doesn't really change. There's apparently a line where engram Johnny can admit he is nothing more than data. He'll admit that his true nature was to inspire rebellion within V, and to honor the real Johnny Silverhand's final wish. I've never seen this, but this means that you can make this Johnny so cold that he completely rejects his humanity. On the other hand, if we show empathy towards him and his past choices, which I think is the far more interesting path, then he can change. Johnny's most important memory in his journey of self-discovery is when he visits his grave, where he thinks his grave is anyways. Here he says he was trying to be reborn again, saying goodbye to the old Johnny. This is a common thing with him, trying to let go of who he was entirely and becoming someone brand new. But this time, it's the culmination of everything he thought he was, amounting to nothing. There is no memorial. There is no marker filled with flowers from loved ones, and there's no way to remember him by. It's empty. He doesn't know at this point that there's a marker for him at the columbarium, and that his body is most likely still out there. But to this Johnny, in death he is remembered by no one. Johnny really begins to reflect here, that he really did let down or use everyone in his life. Realizing this, he wants his time with V to be a fresh start, to be reborn again as someone who doesn't use or let people down. He reflects how people in his life simply couldn't even stand to be around him. He doesn't want to be the selfish bastard that he was when he lived, and maybe V could be his first real friend. This is probably Johnny's first genuinely sincere moment, both with V and maybe with anyone. He's admitting he fucked up with everyone, and wants that to be different with V. He also recognizes that he can't hurt Rogue again, and he won't use her the way he's used her in the past. Which is where we see that Johnny can say that he wants to change, but in the end, he's still Johnny. He has already done this to Rogue to varying degrees, and even though he has this moment where he tells himself he can't, his next suggestion is immediately to take Rogue out on a date, and then ask V to give them their body again. Johnny, to an extent, can't help himself. He is the way that he is, damaged engram or not. And I'd argue that even though he does change with V, and he does have a lot of self-reflection, Johnny at his core is also an unchanging hypocrite. He says he doesn't want to get Rogue involved, that he can't go inserting himself into her life. Yet the very first thing he tells you to do at the beginning of their journey is to call Rogue. And he does it to the very end. Even if you don't choose to involve Rogue, it's still Johnny's preferred route. He wants to get Rogue and go finish what he started, even if it means risking her life. Johnny's moment of vulnerability is quickly upended by Johnny being unable to change. He means everything he says, but he just can't help himself. He is constantly using people and manipulating them to his advantage. Even when he sees Rogue again after 2 years, he tells her he needs her because she's the best. And while she is and he's not lying, he knows exactly what to say to get her to do what he wants. This is why she's so pissed off about it. It's the old Johnny all over again. Johnny treated Rogue like trash. He manipulated her and used her. He cheated on her with multiple women, lied to her, and in a way like his own father, discarded her. And right when he is reborn again, he intends to do the exact same thing. The very first conversation with Johnny in the diner, he tells V that Rogue will do whatever he asks. And he says it so smugly, because he knows he's right. Because Rogue genuinely loved Johnny. Even after all these years, she still held affection for Johnny, to the point that she's willing to relive her time with him, even while he's in the body of someone else. She recognizes him so quickly by his mannerisms, and you can see the emotions on her face. Her love for him never really faded away. Johnny had this amazing woman who would have done anything for him. And yet, He can't accept her love or respect her enough to not treat her like shit. Because he doesn't know how. That's not to excuse his actions. But with a past like Johnny's, it's not hard to understand why love and relationships would be hard for him. And because of this, the people around him would suffer. Johnny was like a flame, charismatic, charming, and captivating, even being the mess that he was. But like a flame, if you get too close, you'll get burned. Rogue knew that all too well. And yet, all these years later, and Rogue still held on to Johnny, even after trying to let go. After his death, she would go on to try a relationship with Maximum Mike, though that wouldn't really work out. And she would most likely end up having a child with Santiago, a man who had been chasing her for a long time. She settled. She couldn't have Johnny, and maybe after Johnny, she didn't really trust men, which is why she stayed within her friend group, with the men she trusted not to do to her what Johnny did. But she went the easy route. Santiago was the easiest, but he wasn't what she wanted, which is probably why Rogue in 2077 is alone. Even her son isn't with her. She's distanced herself from people, which we can see in the data pads around her room. Maybe this is how she survives, by not letting people get too close to her, so they can't hurt her like Johnny did. Maybe because of her relationship with Arasaka, she doesn't want anyone to get involved. Whatever the reason, Rogue is alone. Everyone in her life is at arm's length, and most people are only there for business. But when Johnny shows up, she's ready to dive in head first. He would have spoken to her during his bender, where he had just hooked up with another woman, done a bunch of drugs, and then tried to get Rogue to do what he wanted. It's how Johnny works. He's an addict, he's impulsive, and he's manipulative. And he does it to Rogue immediately. And in a way, maybe she let him, desperate to see him again. She knows how Johnny is, and yet she is pulled right back in. Knowing better than to trust Johnny, she still welcomes him with open arms, even willing to finally go on that date she wanted to go on, the one that he didn't care about, over 50 years later. She knows it's probably a mistake, but what if? What if Johnny's changed? What if things are different? Maybe she wonders what if, and still wants what she could never have. Even though I don't think Rogue ever really got over Johnny's death, luckily 2077 Rogue is older, wiser, and knows better. So she ends the date regardless of what Johnny says. But that doesn't change how eager she was to be with him again, dressing in her best outfit, even getting Johnny a replica of his iconic samurai jacket. She's right back where she used to be, giving Johnny everything in exchange for nothing. It's right back to their old dynamic. In a way, I also think that Rogue wanted to be that younger version of herself, both for her and for Johnny, before the mistakes that they both made. He's been gone for over 50 years, and when he comes back, the world has changed entirely. She's changed too, but I think she wants to give him some normalcy, something of his past. Because even in this moment, Rogue is still being selfless for Johnny. Despite her trying to be the old Rogue he knew, even almost willing to have sex with him in V's body, she stops herself. She knows there's a million secrets between them, knows that things are different, and that she is different. She also probably knows that she deserves better. This moment, I think, gives Rogue closure. That she can say no to Johnny, and that she can finally close that door she's always held open. If she also goes with Johnny to storm Arasaka, then she also gets closure with Smasher and Arasaka. There's a lot of things she had to do to survive, and in a way, Johnny reopens that door for her. Like him, she needs this too, but specifically, when it comes to Johnny and her, she can finally say no and move on. But for Johnny, I think he realizes how much he hurt her, how guarded she is because of him, and he truly wishes that he could have treated her differently back then. I think he means the things that he tells her. He tells her he'd do everything in his power not to lose her, and I think he's being sincere. Not because he realizes that he was actually in love with her though, but because she really is an amazing woman, and he does regret losing her and treating her the way that he did. He says he knows he fucked up and that he sees it. Over half a century later, and he's finally realizing what he lost. He sees the pain he's inflicted. Rogue is an amazing woman, and maybe if he was smarter, he'd have treated her better and tried to make it work. Tried to love her and be loved, but instead he hurt her in ways he'd have to face 54 years later. I do also think this dynamic with Rogue was too easy for Johnny, and that's probably why he never actually loved her. It's a very toxic way to look at it, but he's not a man who wants anything to be easy, even love. He knows Rogue loved him, knows she would have done anything for him. And maybe that bored him. There was no challenge, no chaos or fire, which is the opposite of the relationship that we see with Alt. Johnny and Alt seem very similar. They both live on the edge, are determined and strong-willed. And I think with Alt, Johnny finally met his match. In their argument, we see Alt trying to break it off. So Johnny does it right back, retaliating. This isn't the first time they've done this. They know how to hurt each other where it counts. But it's a game, and whoever cares less wins. It can't hurt if he wanted to leave her in the first place. It can't hurt if he doesn't want to be with her either. So he pushes her away, and then he physically pulls her back. Their dynamic is push and pull. Alt was probably very independent and didn't really need Johnny. I think that dynamic thrilled Johnny. He knew she didn't need him, and maybe he felt less pressured, and so they had a push and pull. When there's too much emotion, he pulls away. When he realizes she doesn't really need him, he pulls her back. Rinse and repeat. It's toxic and chaotic, and everything that Johnny craves. It's also emotionally shallow enough that Johnny can keep himself half in and half out, because he's incapable of more. At this point, Johnny is also heavily into drugs, so what actually happened in his memories with Alt is kind of hazy. There's different options to this memory, so we don't know exactly what happened, but Johnny and his hand do have a mean streak. After all, Johnny is a functioning cyberpsycho. I already spoke about how Johnny abusing Alt is an option in his memories. Was he an abuser? Was he capable of physically hurting Alt? Or is this his resentment towards her manifesting through his hand? Just like with the hand taking over and beating Thompson. Johnny's memories may be unreliable, but within them there is still some truth. But whatever happened, their relationship was toxic. Alt pushes him away and pulls him in just like he does. She challenges him, and I think Johnny enjoys fighting with her and for her. She also calls him out on his bullshit. He's kind of met his match. She's a beautiful, independent, extremely intelligent woman, and maybe he knows that she deserves better. And I don't think Johnny realizes this until the end. With Alt's true job and capabilities being revealed, he knows he underestimated her. So he tries to save her. He sacrifices others for her, spends money, time, and effort to save her. And while yes, his mission was partially to say fuck you to Arasaka, it was mostly to save Alt, the woman who he finally realized he genuinely did love after she was gone. And yet, when he realizes it, it doesn't matter because she's already dead. He knows he messed up. If only he could have been quicker. If only he could have done something differently. If only he'd been better. Maybe he also feels anger at not knowing this part of Alt. Without Johnny, Alt would have been fine escaping. It seems like she had it handled. But Johnny's intervention cost her her life and her body as she knew it. So essentially, Johnny did all of that for nothing. The Alt he loved was gone, and he was the reason. I bet he never even questioned love before, until that moment when Alt dies, and he realizes that he may have really loved her. This highlights how Johnny doesn't really know those around him. He didn't know what her job was, didn't know that right under his own nose, he had one of the most famous netrunners in Night City. But he also didn't know what she was really capable of. Johnny says she doesn't talk about her work, but I bet he also never asked her. His impulsiveness to rescue Alt prevented her from saving herself. And maybe if Johnny had known Alt better, maybe she'd still be in her body and alive. By 2023, he's had 10 years for the guilt to fester. So he'd do what he could. He died trying to help his friends and trying to make sure Alt was able to escape from Arasaka. He wanted to do something right. Alt deserved someone who would fight for her. And so he did. At least he tried. And unlike Kerry and Rogue, who were eager to welcome Johnny into their lives and give them both closure, that isn't what happens with Alt. When he finally reunites with Alt, it isn't really even her. Alt is Alt, but not the Alt he knew. She is cold, calculating, and even in the nicer dialogue options, she still isn't warm or affectionate with Johnny. The love she had for him is gone, and the Alt he loved is gone. He's seeing the consequences of his actions. How tragic to fail someone in this way, to give your life to save them, and that version that you died for is just gone. Johnny has also built resentment towards his own decision of saving Alt. Maybe seeing who she became, he realized it wasn't really worth it. He's angry and uses this to leverage Alt into helping them, that she needs to pay him back. His selfless act of love has turned into a bargaining chip against her. But this is what Johnny does. It's what he knows. This is how he gets people to do what he wants. Or maybe, just maybe, he's also hiding his true feelings, and anger is the only way he knows how to express himself or hide how he really feels. And in the end of V and Johnny's journey, if Johnny ends up going with Alt, then he's reunited with the love of his life. But again, it's not her. This Alt is going to use Johnny as code, maybe just absorbing him for a greater purpose, whatever that is. Even when the two are reunited, the tables have turned in a way that now she is using him. I find this ending for Johnny really sad. He finally gets to reunite with the woman that he loved, the woman that he sacrificed his own life to try and save. But now she is a hollow shell, devoid of the love and lust that they had for each other. His Alt is gone, and now he must remain with this version of her forever. Unlike Rogue and Kerry, Alt's story with Johnny isn't about moving on or healing past wounds. It doesn't feel like he really gets to make amends for his past decisions, but instead he has to face his mistakes head on. And this one probably hurts the most. Everyone that Johnny meets again from his past carries some kind of lingering trauma, emotion, or regret centering Johnny. But I think for Kerry, he was extremely affected by Johnny's death. From data pads around his house, we know that Kerry was extremely lonely and considering suicide. Something was missing from his life, and that thing was Johnny. Kerry genuinely loved Johnny. He looked up to him and admired him. Whether that love was brotherly or romantic is up for debate, but it doesn't matter because his love was sincere. He said he wasn't jealous of Johnny, and I believe him. Instead, I think Johnny was a bit of a guiding light for Kerry. And that's why Kerry followed in his footsteps, took his advice, and lived the life that could have been Johnny's. Johnny's death was a major moment in Kerry's life, so much so that he marked his body with Johnny's passing. A hidden symbol of Makoshi and a cherub waving an anaha, the national leaf of the Philippines. These symbolize Kerry reconnecting with his roots and starting over after Johnny's death. He abandoned his life and tried to start completely new. This was a major change for him, and he made the most of it. But in the end, after becoming rich, famous, and having a family, he still ends up alone, looking for company in the people he's hired to be in his life. Until V shows up. V, which Kerry also has tattoos of to symbolize their importance, is the key to Kerry. Through V, he can reconnect with his past, with Johnny. The devs also confirmed Kerry's romantic interest in male V is because of deeply rooted Johnny issues. I'm not a huge fan of this answer, but it explains why Kerry won't romance female V, but only a male V. It's because of Johnny. Again, I'm not a fan of this, but Johnny makes comments about how badly Kerry wanted to sleep with him. And even though Johnny's ego could have made this up, it seems there might be some truth to it. Even still, like Rogue, Kerry is also absolutely willing to jump back into the past with Johnny, taking it even further than Rogue. Like Johnny, Kerry also needs to feel that time of samurai again. He even wants approval from Johnny when they get the band back together. He was trying to prove something to himself, but also Johnny. Their old dynamic is back. Except this time, Johnny has a clearer picture of how he affected Kerry. This Johnny wants to make amends, heal whatever wounds he gave Kerry. He knows getting the band back together isn't just for him, but Kerry needs it. He gives him support and recognition, and his guitar, because he knows these are things that Kerry needs to move on. I think for Johnny and Kerry, they both get some kind of closure with their reunion, burying any bad blood with their music. Kerry feels deeply towards Johnny. It's obvious in every one of their interactions. And the way that Johnny becomes the catalyst to Kerry's excitement at creating new music is because Johnny is Kerry's muse. After they get Samurai back together and mend their relationship, Kerry goes on to make new music, tour the Crystal Palace, and grow from this. Meanwhile, Johnny is stuck in 2023. Kerry is living the life he could have lived. Johnny probably also wishes he was there to see Kerry's career for himself. He's happy for Kerry's success, even if a bit jealous. Kerry has had many long years of fame, several albums, and he went on to live the life that Johnny could have also had. When they reunite the band, it gives both Johnny and Kerry life. They're both fulfilling their purpose again. Except Kerry can go on to make more music, to play more shows, and be Kerry Uridine. But Johnny Silverhand is dead. Johnny will never play another show, never play with Kerry or Samurai again. He'll never get to be who he was and see where that life would have ended up. It's just over. He comes back and gets a tiny, fleeting taste of what it could have been. Even in the ending with Johnny taking V's body, he doesn't keep the guitar. Could he go on to continue making music? Sure. Music is in his blood, but it's not the same. He will never be Johnny Silverhand again. He's a ghost in the body of V. Johnny gets to live for a tiny moment when everyone he loves has moved on. He gets to see the trauma he inflicted on them. With some, he can make amends, and with others, he cannot. But his past is haunting him just like he's doing to them. Coming back as an engram makes Johnny face all of these hard truths and faces death all over again. At the same time, he's coming to terms with being dead, but also having the opportunity of life dangled right in front of him. He's seeing how his actions when he was alive affected everyone, but he can't go back and change anything. There's a moment in Dogtown where we can see Johnny show jealousy for those who have had candles lit for them. And you can see that Johnny wishes that he had one of his own. Johnny is realizing he does want to be remembered, and it hurts that he isn't. I think this is why in the ending, when he takes V's body, he vows that they won't be forgotten, and he doesn't need the necklace to do so. He knows how it feels to be forgotten, and he won't let that happen to V like it did to him. But this path is complicated for Johnny. Either he steals your body out of hatred or malice if you don't have a good relationship with him, or he takes it against his will because he wants you to live. The Johnny who takes it out of hatred is the same Johnny who woke up in your head trying to kill you. But the Johnny who wants V to live instead is a changed man. But even if it's V who makes this decision, this is still killing V. He's the cause of another person dying, and his engram really take over. There's a selfishness to this, and Rogue hates Johnny for letting this happen. Johnny ends up being the reason why a young V dies, first implanted into their head against their will, making them sick before they die, and then stealing their body and any life they could have had. If anything, I think this is representative of what Johnny does best. He takes and takes and takes, even when he doesn't mean to. Thankfully, this version of Johnny has changed. He leaves Night City and finally leaves his past behind, but he also leaves his guitar. We don't know what his life looks like after this, but I truly do think wearing the face of the person he took everything from means Johnny won't go back to his old ways. In the other endings, Johnny is more resigned and has accepted death. Going with Alt is going to be painful, but I think Johnny maybe thinks he deserves this outcome. He's the reason that she's like this. And after everything he did and wanting to change, and after seeing how much he hurt people, he doesn't want to take away V's opportunity at life. And maybe he even feels like this is what he deserves. The same fate as Alt. Even in the suicide ending, he lets V make that choice and respects it. Again, bringing back his admiration for Wendy O. Williams. He wants people to choose their own fate. Johnny has lived and then relived a rough life. Starting from his childhood, his entire life would be filled with violence and loss. And unfortunately for Johnny, he was doomed from the start. Imagine watching the woman you love die after you did everything in your power to save her. Then she tells you not to come after her. But 10 years of guilt eats at you, so you try again. You do everything you can and sacrifice yourself, so you don't fail her a second time. You're cut in two, not even sure if your sacrifice amounted to anything. And then suddenly your soul is ripped from you. Your mind is recorded into data, and whatever happens leads you to being held in Mikoshi, a place that can rewrite people's memories, change who they are, and turn you into another person. You spend years being held prisoner by the very people you hate, and during this time, you are forgotten. By some fucked up luck, you wake up 54 years later. You see that the world has changed, but only for the worse. Your anti-corporation message and life's mission meant nothing. It didn't amount to anything at all. The corporation who took away the love of your life has only amassed more power, and your life standing against them has faded into obscurity. When you wake up, you're not in control. You have no power and are forced to look the people who you did wrong in the face. You see how much you hurt the people who loved you, how your life and death affected them, but you're also forced to see how they moved on. They lived while you died, and they're better off without you. Kerry has the career you could have had. Rogue became someone in Night City, a legend. And unlike you, Alt is feared and powerful, and is also no longer the woman you loved. She's no longer the woman you couldn't protect. You have to face your past, all while trapped in the head of another person who you're slowly killing. Someone who you grow to care about, and someone who you don't want to let down or hurt. But it doesn't matter, because in the end, one of you is going to die, and it's because of you. Your existence is an unstoppable cancer, and no matter what you do, you're looking death in the face again, watching as this new person you care about suffers because of you, or watching as they continue their life, killing you again in the process. So, away you go with the empty shell of the woman you loved. Or you go on to live knowing that someone else died so that you could be here. Johnny is both a bastard and a tragic person. He has made mistakes, but if you let him, he tries to be better. He is the cause of plenty of suffering, and has killed and gotten people killed. But I think under all that is a man who never really knew love, and maybe didn't think he deserved it. I truly think Johnny hated himself despite his persona. Robert John Linder, the man who died so Johnny could live, never really died. His hurt and feelings of neglect only festered and grew within Johnny, becoming the hatred that Johnny was known for, and his hatred would be his undoing. Whether you view this engram of Johnny as a person dictates whether you see him as tragic or not. Is this engram that's been encoded with Johnny's mind a real person? Can he be the real Johnny with altered memories and a damaged engram? Is this truly the real Johnny? Maybe not 100% because of the damage, but this is Johnny, at least mostly. Our memories and experiences make up who we are, and his have been altered, both by his own ego and possibly someone else. But his engram is enough of Johnny to be recognized by the people who loved him most. Rogue knew immediately, Kerry knew immediately, and Alt recognized his engram code. This may not be the complete version of 2023's Johnny, but it's at least got enough of him to be this Johnny. And this Johnny can feel anger, sadness, and pain. I think that makes him a person. A person who made some terrible mistakes and choices. And a person who was also not cared for early in his life. Johnny is a walking tragedy to me, and I absolutely love him. There's a million theories around Johnny and what his memories actually are, who altered them, and why. How did Arasaka actually get his engram? And why are some of Morgan Blackhand's memories replaced with Johnny, when Johnny was dead during all of those events? Did Alt maybe edit his engram and that's why she recognizes his engram code? Was it Rogue who gave Arasaka his engram, being the only one to see Spider Murphy actually insert it into Johnny? And is Angel Alt? Is there another version of Johnny out there that Alt maybe has had since 2045? There is a million questions, and I don't think a lot of them we're actually ever going to get answers to. But I really do hope they will at least explore Johnny's upbringing, tell us the story of Johnny before we meet him. Mike Pondsmith did an interview with Sphere Hunter about Johnny's past and said that he had been working on a story that revolved around Johnny being sold at the age of 4 and then living with nomads, and I hope at the very least we get that story. I want to know more about Johnny. He's an amazing and interesting character, and honestly, I could have said a ton more about him in this video. I did cut a lot of stuff just because this video got really long, but those are my thoughts about Johnny Silverhand. He's complicated, he's an asshole, he sucks, he's amazing, and I wouldn't change anything about him. I just want to know more. And if you've only played the game, you are missing out on a ton of content. Cyberpunk Red and the several cyberpunk books that the game is based on have so much information, so much lore, so much backstory. And if you want to know more about Johnny, there is more information in there. I did also go over his entire life and everything that I could find out about him in my latest video. So if you want to know more about Johnny, go check that out. And let me know what you think about what I think about Johnny. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think he's an asshole that's not worth redeeming? Or do you usually take the redemption path like I do? Let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching if you are still here. This is another long video. Thank you so much to my channel members and my Patreon members. It's because of your support that I can make more videos. So thank you so much. I will see you all next time.